Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you to all for finding time. I spent 1 year in Oxford doing the Master of Public Policy at the Blavatnik School of Government between 2012 and 2013. I was part of the inaugural cohort and probably the first Weidenfeld Hoffmann scholarships that were allocated for the Blavatnik School. And coming back, it's a really good opportunity because it's a good opportunity to reflect, because I had to think what I'm going to say today, to really think about what are some of those core lessons that I could extract and share with all of you, those lessons that I learned, that I gained in Oxford, as well as through the Weidenfeld Hoffmann Scholarship. And something that I really appreciate about the scholarship, and I think we all agree, is really the leadership program that is attached to the scholarship. The moral philosophy seminars, are they still going? Then the practical skills, especially the moral philosophy seminar, is something really, really important, especially at this time that we're living in. And now I realize that more than back in 2012. Because we talk a lot about leadership, but we don't talk a lot about ethics in leadership. And somehow we tend to forget about that. And our politicians today, our leaders, whoever is involved in high positions, this is the question that we should raise to them, is what sort of ethics are they utilizing? And what sort of principles of governance are they using? And this, to me, was extremely valuable. We can all hone, we can be better or worse at certain technical skills, and we expect to gain those skills through our academic programs. But having that opportunity to take a step back and look at things from an aggregate level, it's really priceless. At least it was for me. So that was one element for me that really, really stick out with the Weidenfeld Hoffmann Scholarship. Another one was the people that we had the opportunity to meet. First of all, as a community that we are, it's mostly about people and ideas, but people being most important part of it. And then all people such as yourself who are continuously involved. And I'll tell you a particular example. There is one particular person who's been affiliated with the Weidenfeld, Sir Jeffrey Nice. He was affiliated before, a human rights lawyer. I met him during the Hartwell seminar. And to me, he was very interesting because he was a prosecutor at the ICTY, prosecuting the former Yugoslav president Milosevic. And to me, it was a sort of interesting professionally, but also an emotional encounter. And since then, I was in touch with him, and we were involved in some transitional justice projects for about 2 or more years, which sort of means that the Weidenfeld Hoffmann Scholarship gave me that continuing education opportunity. So these really make it very, very made it for me an invaluable experience. I'm not sure, my experience is primarily working with the government and working in the policy landscape. So I'll tell you a little bit of, so I graduated from college in 2011. And straight from out of the college, I joined the president's team, and I worked on an anti-corruption initiative. The president was interested in establishing a national anti-corruption council that would coordinate a wide range of stakeholders involved in dealing with public corruption. I spent a year there, then I was given the opportunity to attend Blavatnik School, thanks to a Weidenfeld Hoffmann Scholarship. Spent a year here, then I returned back home, joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, working primarily on interfaith dialogue and combating violent extremism, more on the soft power side of it. And after that, I decided to focus more on rule of law matters, and I joined the cabinet of the Minister of Justice, who later became Deputy Prime Minister. primarily dealing with international legal cooperation, and something that is really dear to my heart, and I would like to talk a little bit more about it, property rights. It's interesting that you would ask, why did I change so many jobs? I've been with the Minister of Justice and Deputy Prime Minister for over 2 years, but in general, this also reflects our electoral cycles. They tend to be shorter than the regular cycles, based on the way how different strands of our political landscape have been functioning recently. A European phenomenon, I would say, especially Southern European phenomenon. And as we speak right now, yesterday, the Parliament voted to dissolve the government. So we expect early elections in June. So we'll see now what my next government job, if government, will be. But maybe just to take a couple of lessons learned from all these different positions that I had, sort of one lesson about government, one about politics, and one about policy. And one thing that I learned about government is that the government, all the time we talk about how inefficient it is. And it's really disconcerting to witness that. And at the same time, I don't think government should be about efficiency. And government should be about a process and legitimacy. And in order to ensure that you enact a policy that is legitimate, that will be implemented after it gets enacted, it's very important to ensure that the process is participatory and inclusive. So getting that buy-in in the process is very important, because with the stakeholders you're talking about in the process, they are your future implementers, and you want to make sure that you preempt any criticism beforehand, so that people do not discredit your policy and discredit the merits behind the policy just because they were not involved. It irritates people, and many times you're not dealing with policy itself, you're dealing with people. And it's very important to ensure that inclusiveness is key to the government business. And that means that if something that you could design in a private sector in 2 months, maybe it takes you 18 months in the government. But then the likelihood that that policy will be implemented is way higher. So I would say this is one lesson that I learned from government, which means that although sort of government is obsessed with self-preservation, it's not necessarily innovative, I do understand why government should focus on process, and why should we sympathize when the government takes more time to design policy. The second lesson, it's about, I would say, the way, how long do you want to last in politics and how. I think it's extremely important to manage expectations and to make sure that if a politician who promises a lot, he or she is more likely to sort of perhaps get a position in government, but at the same time, those type of leaders are short-lived. So it's really, really important to make sure that you are in touch with your electorate, and that you understand and you explain to them that you cannot deliver everything what they need and what they want. And this goes back to the last lesson that I would like to share with you. It's good policy means that you cannot satisfy everybody. You have limited resources, you have limited energy, and you have limited funding. There's a budget, and you have to decide how you want to use that budget. And many times, if you want to prioritize, that means that you're leaving someone behind. It's not that you're not going to deal with that part of the society, but if you are dealing with, let's say, young families, or you want to subsidize food and baby clothing, that means that you might have less money for the elderly. So it's important in this context to make sure that the process involves evidence, it involves facts, which is something that in the 21st century, rather than trying to do more, unfortunately, in this time that we're living in, that's being threatened. It seems that data and facts are not being appreciated that much. Truths are being created independently of that. But that's really, really important if we really want to change something. And change comes, unfortunately, many times incrementally. And the whole process is, how do you make sure that you communicate with people so that you maintain their trust? These are my lessons learned. Something that I've been doing recently is working on strengthening private property rights in Kosovo. Unfortunately, Kosovo is facing large informality in the land sector. And to us, it was really important to try to formalize right to property and to make sure that there are streamlined procedures for people to come forward and formalize their rights, because that's important for legal certainty, so that people's property is more secure. It's important for businesses, for investors, when they decide to invest, both locals and internationals. So we thought that for our sustainable development trajectory, we needed to work a lot on property rights. So there was an economic part of it, but another part was a human rights issue. And I wanted to speak a little bit about women's property rights. Unfortunately, that's a big problem in Kosovo. Currently, just to tell you some statistics, only 3.8% of women inherit property, and only 18% of women own property. And these are very low figures. And this is disempowering for women, because when women do not own property, they cannot be independent. They do not possess collateral to get a loan to develop their business, and they're even more susceptible to domestic violence because they have nowhere to go. So it is a big problem. And here, this is sort of my experience that led me to conclude that sometimes process is way more important than efficiency, and sometimes introducing procedures in the government is important for human rights, and justice. So on the policymaking side, in order to improve the property rights in general in Kosovo, to understand who owns what, to address informality, and to strengthen the property rights of women, it took us 18 months. To develop policy. But although it's a sensitive area, in the end the government managed to pass this national strategy on property rights. But then also when it comes to, on the one hand, when we're dealing with informality, we need to streamline procedures so that we incentivize citizens to come forward and formalize their rights. But then on the other hand, a lot of women, they decide not only that they do not inherit property, they commit a positive act. They go forward and they renounce their property. So our question as a government was, how do we sort of discourage women to do this? And how do we make sure that we sort of identify pressure and we sort of go against certain cultural attitudes that are not in line with our vision as a country? And we said, why don't we sort of conduct some safeguards, which I would like to use an oxymoron. Let's put some positive red tape on. And that would include when, for example, women go through an inheritance proceeding, a special hearing in the court only with the judge, to make sure that the person, the woman or the potential heir is sort of protected from that cultural pressure that comes in that process. Second would be, we're thinking of, based on the strategy, to introduce a cooling off period. The moment the potential heir decides to renounce his or her rights to property, that decision will not come into effect immediately. And the last one is really, we're trying to conduct some form of economic valuation valuation of economic conditions of the person who decides to renounce property. Because if the lady decides to renounce her rights to property just because she feels indebted to her brother who took care of her parents, and he lives with her parents, and she feels indebted as a result, she thinks that the brother should have the entire estate. But if her brother really is in a really good position economically, but the sister is really struggling and has children, and she still decides to renounce, we were wondering what sort of, to what extent can the government have a say on how would private property in this case be distributed. So these are some of the work that I've been doing on recently, which is more, I would say, technical and less political. And it's something that I want to make sure that we leave a legacy behind regardless of our electoral cycles. And this is some of the work that I'm really proud of that we did, that the government and the Deputy Prime Minister did himself, and I'm part of this exercise. And just the last thing, to go back to more abstract level, what is the pleasure that I get out of all of this work? It's really impact. You see impact on the ground, and that's really sort of brings great satisfaction to your work. You feel fulfilled, and that's something and you're dealing with issues that matter to people. And if you take an action, or you don't take an action, or you prevent an action from occurring, you're really making sure that you're impacting people's lives. And it really, this job comes with great responsibility. Sometimes it's frustrating because it's slow. Though at the same time, it's really, really, when you take a step back and think what you do, it's really a valuable experience. Thank you.
I want to just ask you, so when you said you have impact, can you give me an example of where you'd say, God, I've had that impact?
So one it's, I can take another property rights example, and then one thing that we did recently is, in order to increase the number of women who own property, we removed the tariff for if you're jointly registering your property in the name of, let's say, husband or wife. And when you see the numbers increasing of the number of women owning property, that's really, really something that you can directly correlate with the input on the ground. Then another thing, what you do in the government, sometimes you're legislating and you're drafting laws. And the process, how it's done, it can be really messy because you're dealing with different stakeholders. And let's say if you want to determine the powers of the notaries versus courts on certain proceedings, you have these two fighting, the lawyers, the advocates fighting as well. So you do have that sort of opportunity to think, to sort of first try to address their requests, but then at the same time evaluate how that impacts citizens. And sometimes in this case you prevent certain interests dominating that debate. And finally, another example would be really dealing with individual requests. Sometimes you have citizens' letters that you receive and you're expected to respond. Or if you're in the Ministry of Justice, you're dealing with extradition requests, with the request for a transfer of prisoners. And they're waiting for your response, what the institution will say. So you might decide to leave a request down so that you look at it the morning after, knowing that one more day would be it would feel ages for a citizen. So there are a wide range of examples that you really have an impact, and it and sort of depends on you how things turn out.
And are you a civil servant, as it were, or are you a government appointment, as it were?
So I am appointed. I'm a member of the political staff of the Deputy Prime Minister.
So if the election goes,
I go. But another caveat, which makes the work very interesting because you're dynamic. You also have these short-term, sort of deliverables and work streams that you work on. But another caveat on my position, I also am affiliated through a USAID project. And I want to continue doing some more property rights work through them. Because we do receive support from our international partners, especially USAID, when it comes to strengthening property rights.
to ask some questions.
Right. Hi, I'm Ty.
Hi, Tai.
Hi, Ken. Can you tell us about what your typical day at work looks like?
Yes. First, I always think that I more tend to think about my typical week, and it ends up never being typical. And this is the difference between being a civil servant and being in a political cabinet. A lot of our work is also reactive, and the way and something happens while you're working on something more strategic. You start writing a press statement, and working for a politician, a minister, or a prime minister, or a deputy prime minister, you're expected to be a generalist. You expect to attend meetings. Sometimes I deal on a daily basis from agriculture to economics to development to rule of law matters. So you're really expected to be alert, to try to scrutinize information quickly, have a good conceptual understanding of them, and then brief your boss. But primarily, I mean, every day we meet with the Deputy Prime Minister in the morning, the team. We have our morning coffee. We get our daily assignments. We touch base with each other about more longer-term assignments, and then we carry on with our work. Plus, we also have our own personal meetings with different stakeholders, depending on. So a lot of meetings during the day. And I tend to do mostly my sort of desk work early in the morning or late at night. And then during the day, it's a lot of meetings and just talking to people.
Thank you so much. My name is Afton. I'm from Zimbabwe. You touched on the matter to do with the property rights. And I found that to be a very interesting matter because it's something that marries culture, traditions, as well as policy. I've got a two-part question. The first part is, how is inheritance handled in a particular culture and country and traditions?
Mm-hmm.
If a family has a son and a daughter, how does the property pass down? The second is about purchasing land or owning property. Is that possible for someone? Is it an option that's available to males and females?
Mm-hmm.
Then based on that question, I'm going to ask the next question, which is that we live in a world where we want certain things to go the way that we want them to, because that is the right way to do things. However, we are bound by cultures and traditions. How do we marry those two? It speaks to the first question. What I'm thinking about is we've got a particular culture where when thinking about a heterosexual couple, when a man meets a woman and he falls in love with her and they want to get married, he has to go to her family and ask for her hand in marriage. However, he has to go with a gift as a token of appreciation because they raised his wife. And that was traditionally how it was constructed. However, we're facing a challenge now because we're living in a world where an individual releases or gives this token of appreciation and starts to think of it as having purchased their wife.
Mm-hmm.
So now, how do you address something like that? Because on one hand, the battle between what we want and what we have. On the different levels of society, if we were to go in and impose a law and say that the gifts of appreciation, the tokens of appreciation are not supposed to be given anymore, you will face some kickback from the community because they're saying, are you saying we're not to be appreciated or to appreciate our parents? Can you please talk a bit more about that?
Sure. And something that it's both in common in terms of inheritance legislation and in general the spirit of our constitution and legislation at large, it's really, really sophisticated. Because the way how Kosovo became as a state was under many conditions, an international project in a way, internationally supported project. So it's really, our constitution does ensure that rights are equal between men and women, including when it comes to marriage as well. The constitution says the marriage is between two persons rather than a man and a woman, giving way to amending our law on family right now, which it says it's between a man and a woman. But if we want to change, and eventually we will, to give right to homosexual couples as well, that means that we will only require a simple majority of parliament members to amend the law. So our legislation, it's very, very sophisticated. But when it comes to implementation, it becomes a problem. And this is the question when it comes to, all these citizens have these rights, but in a way they don't necessarily exercise them. So what can the government do to make these rights more accessible to people? And here it comes with inheritance. Instituting safeguards to make sure that we sort of get an outcome that our Constitution intends to achieve. Another big problem is that the way how property passes down is really on an informal setting. We say that we have a lot of, we call it delayed inheritance cases. A lot of property, it's still in the name of someone's great-grandfather, and people just pass it down. This sort of oral tradition is trustworthy enough. People in the village know who owns what, so there's really no conflict. So I talked earlier about this right to renouncement, but a lot of women or potential heirs do not even have the opportunity to exercise that right, because these rights are transacted in an extra legal context. Same with purchasing land. Now it's becoming more and more common for people when they purchase land to make the financial transaction through banks, to go to the cadastre and register that. And why it is challenging for us in particular is that it's not that we're starting from scratch. We've always had a cadastral system, but it hasn't been updated. So now how do you conduct a large-scale sort of formalization without disrupting the land market? Cultural traditions, cultural attitudes are very difficult to challenge. And here we try to do some spinning. We try to think about the core of why, so one big theme and what big value that Kosovars have is really family, protecting the family. And we start from that maxim. What does it take to protect the family? And back in the time we understand why maybe that male line of inheriting was common, but nowadays it seems that if we want a healthy family in which a woman can resist domestic violence, in which the children can be raised in a healthy environment, then in that context we are telling people that if you equally divide your property, you're a patriot in a way. You are a good citizen, that's good for the family, and that's we need to adjust in order to maintain the strong family value.